This is Only the Strong Survive, a podcast powered by Kahn Media, where we dive deep into the world of business, leadership, and innovation. I'm your host, Dan Kahn, and I'm honored to have you join us today. So, let's get ready to learn some survival skills together. Hey, welcome back to Only the Strong Survive. I'm your host, Dan Kahn, and today we've got a great show for you that I'm really looking forward to. Joining me today are Jeremy Gerber, Phil Gerber, and Josh Henning, the guys behind some of the coolest custom cars and really one of the most innovative aftermarket companies in the industry, Roadster Shop, as well as the hosts of the Oil and Whiskey podcast. First of all, guys, thanks for coming on. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having us. You do a way better job than we do.
That's exactly what I was thinking when he said that. I was
professional. It's a way better intro.
Yeah, that's a good intro.
I don't know, man. I'm looking at your, I got my little chintzy sign here, and you got your whole setup in the background. It's pretty cool.
It's all good. Yeah, it's weird being on the other end. We've been doing so many of these. It's cool to put the ball in your court. You got to come up with the questions.
Stress-free.
Keep the energy up.
I'm not worried if it's recording or not or any of that kind of stuff.
Shameless plug. I was on your show a while ago, and you guys were gracious enough to have me on while I was traveling on the road. So I apologize now. I don't like listening to my own voice.
It's tough. I know what you mean. Not your voice.
Yeah. I love your show. I listen to every episode of your show. So if everyone listening to this show, listen to Oil and Whiskey. If you don't already, you probably already do. Mine was I'm like, shit, the audio quality's not great in my RV. So thanks for putting up with that.
Hey, it was great.
Yeah, sorry I couldn't be there. I was out of town at the time. So
that just means we got to do it again.
That's no excuse because he was out of town. But
I didn't have an RV.
You didn't have Starlink is what you need.
That just means, Dan, you got to come out and do it in person. We got to do it again and run it back.
Well, to kick things off, each of you introduce yourself, and then let's just kind of give a quick rundown on both on Roadster Shop and on Oil and Whiskey.
Okay, I'll start it off. Well, I'm Jeremy Gerber at the Roadster Shop. I'm, I guess, kind of handle some operations, some of the creative vision, product direction, a little bit of everything. We've grown tremendously, so a lot of my responsibilities have been shed to other talented members of the team, and where I enjoy being, where I thrive, is just coming up with cool shit. To just sum it up, I think that's it. It's little details on cars, new products, crazy, wild, one-off cars, working with Chris Gray on some stuff here, and just creating.
And I am Phil Gerber. I kind of run the front-end business side of the Roadster Shop, all the not so fun and exciting accounting, payroll, all that type of stuff to keep the thing going, moving forward. A little bit of involvement in some of the cool stuff here and there. Been growing quite a bit over the years and just kept expanding and building the team around us to take the business to the next level.
Sweet.
Short version.
I'm Josh Henning. I kind of fall in between. I'm the X-Lax guy. I'm the get shit done guy. It's the, hey, we need to make this happen and figure it out, that kind of stuff. Chassis shop related or other shop related. Whatever needs to be done gets done. Together, we host the Oil and Whiskey podcast. Been doing that coming up on 3 years. It's been a lot of fun. We've gotten to know a lot of guys we already knew or some guys we didn't know even further. Great conversations, and it's really helped out us probably more than it has the listeners to be able to see the other side of things. So I think it's been really good.
So when I did your show, I wanted to have whiskey, and I was on the road in Idaho at the time. So, and we talked about on your show, there's all these weird liquor laws there. So I had to go to the state liquor store, and I got 2 bottles of this, I don't remember the brand, unfortunately, but some Idaho made bourbon. And I crushed most of the bottle over the course of that conversation. So my wife got back. I was like, what the hell's wrong with you? And I'm like, no, I'm having a good time. The second bottle I saved for my neighbor, who is the principal of a all-boys Catholic high school. He really likes whiskey, and I saved it for him, and I lost it. And so for a month and a half, I've been pissed off at myself. I'm like, that goddamn bottle is somewhere in this RV. I got to find it. I finally found it, and I just gave it to him last weekend. So I'm going to admit, I was kind of he doesn't know. I didn't.
But you knew. You knew.
Yeah.
It adds to the aging process. I mean, sitting in a hot RV could have stimulated something.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Jefferson's made all kinds of money on that marketing of putting it in an ocean and going across the country. I mean, going across the world.
This is true. Let's go back in time a little bit. I first became aware of Roadster Shop maybe 08, 09. When was the C1 RS? When did you guys build that?
That was 09.
Okay. So I remember that car, and it was insane. And I remember having my mind blown, but give me the origin story because, I think you guys, at least, Phil and Jeremy, I know you guys kind of grew up in collision repair and paint and body. And so what's your origin story? And then Josh, when did you come into the whole thing?
How far do we want to go back? we get some people in here that they start at like kindergarten, or I was born. I remember being born.
Drew, my
Yeah, and
face.
then-
We talked about my ride to school when I was a kid, so why not go for it?
Yeah, I mean, for us, me and Phil, we were kind of destined for this, destined or forced, doomed, into being in the automotive industry in some capacity. As you mentioned, my father was first generation auto collision, third generation in the automotive glass business. So my great grandpa started Gerber Glass probably in the 20s, 30s,
Somewhere around there.
a long time ago. They were putting glass in Model Ts and skyscrapers and Sears Tower. I think they've got my grandpa, he stepped in, and whenever they built the Sears Tower, I mean, that's a cool thing, right? A lot of the windows, a lot of the mirrors and stuff. Not like they didn't, I wouldn't be sitting here today if they were putting the glass on the exterior of the Sears Tower, but had something to do with it. And then probably in maybe 70s when Dad kicked off the
body shop side.
Yeah, he kicked off the body shop side of things, and that kind of changed the direction of the business. So we come along in the early 80s. Dad's growing an auto collision business, working his ass off, and that's just kind of what we knew. It was like Dad was cooler than everybody else's dads because he fixed cars. Yeah, we just grow up hanging out in the shop, just like my kids do now. Want to go to the shop, and you just, I remember still to this day, every time we spray clear on a car, you open up the paint booth door, and it just reminds me of being like, I don't know, 6, 7 years old, inhaling shit I probably shouldn't have inhaled, but fond memories. So
spark the creative side.
It maybe, yeah, it probably lost some of the business side or the finance side. I maybe would have been doing something up front, adding numbers or something a little more, in the books. But yeah, as we grew a little bit old enough to start actually doing something, we were kind of bouncing between like departments. My dad would throw us with, like, for me early on, throw you with like a prepper. His business was real like subdivided and all sorts of different aspects. There were frame guys and paint guys and preppers and body guys. So between me and Phil, we pretty well like just made our rounds through the shop. I mean, probably starting at like 8, 9 years old, we're painting go-kart bodies and kind of just learning the general like fundamentals of how you operate a DA and how you handle a spray gun and things like that. And probably by the time we were, I don't know, 12, 13, where we were old enough to actually like do something, and then it moved on to being a prepper and then cleaning cars and being a porter and stuff like that. Just grew up in the body shop business to the point where by the time I was maybe 15, 16, something like that, pretty much doing like full-time body man type position. I mean, hanging quarter panels, doing unisides. I mean, some pretty heavy collision stuff for a relatively young dude. Obviously, I knew the guy that owned the place, so I probably got moved up the ladder a little bit quicker than some guys.
I grew up in a family business, and that can work kind of two ways. Either everyone sort of treats you with kid gloves, or they really just hammer you because they can, and kind of maybe depends on what the old man told everyone to do.
We got both sides. Now that I know a little bit more Spanish, some of the names that were bouncing around back there weren't as endearing.
They weren't with love.
Yeah, not as endearing as I thought they may have been. But yeah, I think it was a per case basis, but makes your skin a little bit tougher and helps you out at the same time.
It was definitely one of those things. I think my dad had a tremendous amount of respect, I think, from virtually everybody that he employed. So times were different back then. I think just out of respect for him, we gained some respect. He always taught you to just work your ass off, never be sitting still, work harder than the guy next to you. I thought I was doing that. Looking back now, they're probably like, man, that damn boss's kid out here, son of I got to work with this kid.
Dealing with all the gravy jobs.
Yeah. And it was something that like clicked with me, physically working with my hands, building things. And it kind of steered me towards like, what do you do when you get out of high school? Where we grew up, it wasn't loaded with automotive programs and things like that. That was kind of like all like taboo. It was weird. Like you went to college, you maybe went for business, something like that. You weren't really guided much. So all I knew was working on cars, doing body work and stuff like that. So I found a school called Ferris State University out in Michigan, Big Rapids, Michigan. To the Michigan folks, is just south of Nashville, Tennessee, I think.
Okay.
Michigan is that area.
That country is what you're saying.
Yeah. Got it.
It was kind of like a normal university, but it also had an autobody program. So instead of, bringing the futon and whatever else people bring to college, I brought a Snap-on toolbox and Dickies and work shirts. Probably 3/4 of the day was just hands-on in the shop, fixing cars and learning like some of the fundamentals and things. And then there were a few like normal core educational things mixed in there. Turned out to not be such a good deal because I was kind of like way above and beyond that. So day one was like, this is body filler and this is hardener. And you put this much hardener and this much body filler, and here's how you do this. So it's probably no surprise I wasn't much of a scholar, in my early years, but
You were a little shocked.
Yeah,
that
it
was a
was.
surprise.
Took
to
me
you
by
guys.
surprise.
For the first time, it was like, holy shit. I mean, this is what it's like to be the really smart kid in class. I think I finished 2 semesters of whatever their criteria was for it in like a month. And then they just didn't know what to do with me. So they're like, oh, there's this old Mercedes sitting in the corner. You could do some rust repair on that. I'm just sitting there by myself. All the other kids are trying to complete their first like body filler dent, probably like a 2-hour dent in the side of just some late model car. And I'm trying to build rocker panels and lower fenders for a 70s Mercedes with zero equipment. So, I started putting things in like some of the shop drawers, and you'd clamp them down and use that as a sheet metal brake. And that was like my first taste of actual fabrication. Yeah. From there, I think I just pieced out of that school after that semester, because it was like, this is just not for me, not going anywhere here. And thought maybe you should get like an associate's degree, something like that, because that's again like a normal thing to do. Also didn't work out for me. Decided one night, I'm like, I'm not cut out for any of this school shit. I'm like designed to build things and to work. So went back home and went to work for my dad again, full-time body man at this point, and never something I really wanted to do for any length of time. Found myself drawn way more to fabrication and creating shit and doing bumper jobs and stuff like that. There's zero passion in it. You could be like passionate about your craft and do it well, but at the end of the day, you're fixing something for somebody who's pissed off already that they have to be there. So they're
Right.
never happy,
It's like going to the dentist. No one really wants to go there.
Exactly. Yeah. And even if it comes out good, you're like, well, it's fucking supposed to, it's the dentist.
Right.
And I'm just like rambling on and on. This is from like inception, but yeah, I don't know, Phil, you want to like catch up to that time frame, because that's kind of sort of the time frame when we came together and started making this shit happen.
Yeah, I'll go the abbreviated version. I kind of went a little bit different path, started in the shops, painting, prepping, porter, car washer, then kind of moved into the office side, estimator, parts department, assistant production manager, and I kind of just went down that path. Ended up going to school for the business side of things, and that was kind of my plan, was to kind of move into the front office side of the body shop business. Went to school 4 years, came back, worked at one of the big body shops for about a year and a half, was the production manager, running 140 cars a month through there. Wiped out every single day. Come home, I'd be in bed at like 8 o'clock and then back up at 6 o'clock, back to work, and there on Saturdays. And that was just kind of my whole life. About that time, the whole body shop industry was going through some consolidation. One consolidator approached my dad about purchasing the body shop business. And after a little bit of talking, he wanted to have more of a family business again. It had gotten a bit too big. So he wanted to work with me and my brother. At the time, he had about 17 different body shops around the Chicagoland area. So even though we were working together, we were at different locations and weren't really spending that time together that he had always kind of envisioned and how he grew up. And so I think that was a lot of the motivation for him to make the move. At the same time, like my brother said, you're the bad guy from the moment you wake up till you go to sleep. Customers come in, they're upset they got in an accident. They're upset they've got to pay a deductible. The guys working on the cars are upset because the hours are constantly being kind of cut by the insurance companies and you got to get them done faster. Not the most thankful position. I think he wanted out and wanted to work with us. At the time, my dad and mostly Jer were working on a little Model A Ford hot rod, building on a 32 chassis. Jer went to work at the Roadster Shop, which was an existing company at the time. You run.
Yeah, that's a whole thing. I kind of forgot like the whole hot rod side of things.
I wanted to ask about that.
That's what we do. I was coming home like every weekend, right? These Central Michigan, it's a fucking weird place. So I did not fit in there at all. So I learned 2 things that were interesting, like new feelings for me. Number 1 was like being the super smart kid. And number 2 was like being the nerd that like nobody wanted to hang out with. You know, so I'm like, this is fucking weird. Like this is a total culture shock, right?
They kind of go hand in hand usually.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I guess they do. Yeah. I was going home like every weekend. You know, it was only like 3.5 hours away. And we were building a Model A, 31 Model A coupe project. So that was like what I'd look forward to. You know, I'd think about that all week and kind of plan out what we're going to do and then come home and then thrash on that. And then Sunday night, hightail it back to school, be a little lazy on Monday. But yeah, that was like our first real hot rod project. We restored some cars, both me and Phil. You know, when I was 15, me and my dad built a 69 Camaro that I still have today. Continued to tinker with that like all throughout high school. It evolved and turned into like 3 or 4 different versions of that car throughout high school. And then, yeah, as Phil said, after I was working at the body shop there, I think I was like 20, probably 19 years old. I just didn't want to do that, you know, and we had bought that chassis. My dad had bought that chassis for the Model A from the Roadster Shop. So Roadster Shop existed. I mean, it's been around since early 80s, I want to say.
I mean, I worked for Rod and Custom in like the very early 2000s. I actually worked for a Street Rod magazine before that in the late 90s. And I kind of remember the name. Like before you guys, I'm really fuzzy on the details. Like where was that based? Was it like a chassis manufacturer or was it like a Street Rod shop?
It's crazy if you really look way back to its early years. It was a chassis shop. They built 30s and 40s stuff.
Like a Fat Man or a Pete and Jake's kind of thing, like mostly like Street Rod type stuff?
Like that, but I mean, super small scale on the chassis side. But the way it worked out, like years ago, probably in the early to mid 80s, it was owned by Bill O'Rourke and it was going like pretty hot and heavy. You know, they were building like fiberglass, like roller packages and stuff and building some street rods.
That was the heyday of that whole thing, right? That was when it was just cranking.
Yeah, it was. And I bet you they had at that point in time probably like 20 or so employees. You know, the martinis started flowing and then a divorce came. I think things went a little sideways there for the Roadster Shop. Once the smoke cleared and the dust settled, it just kind of turned into a tiny little kind of hot rod shop. I think Bill was just worn out on the whole business thing and got drugged through the mud with the divorce and stuff. I don't know all the details, but just speculating. And then it was just really kind of existed only to support his hobby. So small little shop, probably 8,000 square feet, something like that, out in Elgin. There was one chassis fabricator there and one guy that was like the mechanical hot rod guy. They had one guy that was doing paint and body, and then the world famous Chad Glasshagel, who we've had on this podcast before, he was the fabricator. And then there was me. I wanted to build hot rods, right? And I, at the time, even though it's this tiny little shop, 3-4 guys working there, I went out there, I was like starstruck. You know, there was a 32 Ford pickup, little highboy pickup sitting out front with a flathead and like some belly burner side pipes on it, a little red 32 Roadster and a couple other, you know, kind of what I would walk right past today. But back in that era, I was like, holy shit, this was really, really cool. So that was it for me. I mean, I was sold. That's what I'm doing. I'm going to professionally build hot rods for a living. We convinced Bill O'Rourke to at least have lunch with me, talk it out, see if there was a position for me. So sat down, had lunch with him, corned beef hash, 2 eggs, over easy, of course.
That's awesome. You remember what she ate?
Yeah.
All right.
It just clicked. I think there was something he saw in me. I don't know if it was a lot he saw in me because he hired me on at $5 cash an hour, but that
I
was,
think he saw free help.
yeah,
That's
that
what he
was
saw.
Cheap help.
that was a lot of money. You know, I was like, I thought I was king of the castle. I was kind of more or less, you know, I don't know, like an apprentice type, but I had a lot of skills. I mean, I had a lot of fabrication skills at that point. I was taking classes and things and kind of self-taught on a lot of stuff. And then fortunate to kind of hook up with Chad there, who, you know, he really took me under his wing and taught me a tremendous amount of stuff. And yeah, worked there, I want to say probably about 2 years, building frame rails, building some chassis. Certainly had a knack for sheet metal work. I had no tools. I mean, there was about as many tools as I had in my little college experience, maybe a wider drawer and more poles that you could bend things over. But that was about it as far as equipment.
We're not talking like Pomax machines and Yoders and stuff.
There was a Harbor Freight-ish, this is probably pre-Harbor Freight, but Harbor Freight style bead roller that nobody was allowed to use, that was like collecting dust under the bench. And me and Chad, we resurrected that thing and then piled up a bunch of welding gloves to make a shot bag out of it. And we're trying to like, shape stuff with dead blow hammers, try to roll some beads that, the thing was all like bent up and it would roll crooked and stuff. But that was the early years of learning fabrication.
So when did you guys acquire the business?
2004, Dad had sold the body shop business, and I think he had planned on sticking around for a while, but a month or two later, I think he was ready to get out of there. That was kind of our decision. I think he sat us down and asked what we wanted to do, and Jer was pretty hardcore into the Roadster Shop at the time, or loved the hot rods, and was kind of already almost burnt out in the body shop world. So we kind of made the decision to purchase the Roadster Shop. My dad's retirement and our future. May of 2004 is when we took over.
Well, congrats, guys. You're 20 years
20
in.
years.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. Okay, so Josh, you've been uncharacteristically quiet. What?
I'm listening to the stories.
Yeah. So when did you get involved? And did you guys know each other before all this?
No, that's what I'm going through my head. They're talking about 2004. I think we met in 2006, which I didn't even realize was that soon after.
So those first couple of years then, so you buy the thing in 04, that was kind of like towards the end of the billet deal. The traditional hot rod thing was kind of coming on at that point. So like, what was the goal in the early days of you guys owning it? Was it like, we're going to be like a hot rod shop, or?
You know, to be honest with you, we really had no idea. I can speak for myself. I'm sure Phil's a little more organized and probably had a better vision for this. I was just happy to be doing that, right? So whatever came in the door just to build stuff with your hands was just awesome. Never sat down at like in the very, very early years and said like, this is exactly what we need to be doing. And this is going to take us to the next step. And then this is going to happen. And then we'll move into this. It was just trying to like make a name for ourselves a little bit just by our craftsmanship. A lot of it, to be honest, man, was like damage control, you know?
First few years were tough. We didn't know what we had gotten into or what kind of hornet's nest we kicked. Bill didn't make the most friends in his last 10 years of business, we'll say.
Zero friends. No friends.
So like vendors and customers, like people were.
Vendors, not so much because it was so small scale. Some of the older vendors would remember the name from back in the day, but yeah, people, customers, because they were, I mean, I'd say, what do you think chassis wise? They're putting out maybe like 10 a year, something like that.
Yeah, maybe.
Every one of them was fucked up, like out of 10 for 10 as far as like issues. I mean, like craftsmanship was phenomenal. The frame rails were beautiful, obviously, because I was building them. But there was like little things. There was no theory as far as like suspension or like drivetrain angles or like performance, or nobody was even driving stuff back then. So
minimal tooling. It was very primitive. You were going off of like hand-drawn blueprints that were 20 years old. And
we knew the next step was you need to get out there in front of people. The only way to do that was to get out at shows, because sitting there in that small little community, you're small scale, you know, and you got to get out like to the world. So went out to start doing some shows, and that was just, you're like a damn punching bag. I'd say like 75% of the people who came through the booth wanted to take a swing at you. They're like, I got a Tri-5 chassis and the motor's sitting at 10 degrees. You're like, dude, that's impossible. Like 10 degrees? There's no fucking way it would be doing that. It's like a wheelie, 10 degrees. And then they'd show you a picture like, yeah, that's 10 degrees. Like, holy shit. You can't shim that, right? That's not like an 1/8 inch shim, pick up the tail shaft and you're good to go. So it took a while. I'd say it took 2-3 years to get through that. You know, we just remedied it all.
I was going to ask, so how do you, when you've got a guy that you never took his money, he bought a chassis 5 years before you bought the company, do you just make it right?
Yeah.
In most cases, I was driving all over the country, picking stuff up, bringing it back. We'd fix it, send it back. Ate a lot in that day, but
telling everybody it's not your problem is not exactly the best foot forward in starting a business and getting a good reputation.
So I guess on that note, then, in retrospect, and certainly you have a huge amount of brand equity now in the RS name, but would you have been better off just starting something new? Or do you think that despite the headaches, it was still worthwhile having an established brand that you kind of...
That's tough to say, because realistically, yes, you'd have been so much better off. So it would have been so much easier starting from scratch. But the missing element there would have been the chassis business, because for us, that wouldn't have been something that we just decided like, let's open up a chassis shop. You know, it would have been like, let's just build cool cars. So the fact that sort of existed in some capacity drove us to improve it, to make it better and better and better. That's what we did. I mean, we started just coming out with like different versions of the 32 chassis and making things a little more unique. We were tinkering, you know, Phil and my dad were both great with infusing some marketing ideas, you know, and it would be like, let's take this chassis. I've been stretching these 32s like 2 inches and hammering them in the front and stepping the rear rails. And I just call it a stretch 32 chassis that's hammered in the rear with the rails stepped and the front pinched and it's kind of a mouthful. Well, he'd come in and it'd be like the Deuce Edition chassis and you'd just start branding it. And then that stuff started hitting. And all of a sudden we went from being the guys who were building chassis with crazy motor angles and all sorts of wacky stuff to like Roadster Shop's got the stance, man. You look at a 32 Roadster, yeah, and it's got it going on. We weren't really doing like traditional cars. It was at the tail end of like the big 20-inch wheels, ability kind of street rods. But I think we had the look.
The Boyd era, that was sort of the end
Yeah.
of that whole thing.
Yeah, I think the American Hot Rod was rocking and rolling then, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So, Josh, give us your background. How did you find the guys? And
I'll abbreviate my background just for time's sake.
I'm rambling.
It'll one day that story will come out. That's a long story. They bust my balls all the time for the amount of jobs I had. And honestly, at a very young age, I remember it was probably 9 or 10, like my first art class, and probably in middle school. My project, whatever, first semester, I drew the Orbitron. Right, it was side profile.
Orbitron.
Ed Roth.
Yeah.
So side profile and then front and rear 3/4 view, right, in landscape. And I was able to just draw that car and get better. At a very young age, I was into cars. I always say my dad wasn't into stuff. My dad was into cars at a young age. I remember him having, shackled up Mustang and Camaro and Monte Carlos, and all of his friends run around Indiana, and they were muscle car guys. However, when he chose the path of being a preacher, he was very pragmatic, and cars were always, that was a luxury thing. Right. Cars is, a car that you modify was something you were able to do either way back in the day because it was cheap, or you have a lot of money to do. So that was just not in our future, never was talked about, never was anything like that. From playing with cars, magazines and stuff like that, always was going to do something with cars. They'll tell you this now, I don't have a lot of plans. I don't really plan a lot of things out for too far along. It's just kind of what's the worst that could happen. I said at a young age, I'm going to make a living in the car industry. Don't know how, don't know what. I'll just find the next thing. I had to go to 1 year of Bible college because my dad made me. And I went Dad made me go and went 1 year. It was obvious to everybody that was a mistake and didn't go back, and then went to.
Was that your decision or theirs to not going? Or was it a mutual?
It was mutual.
Luckily, I didn't want to go back, but they said I couldn't come back.
Okay.
So it was. I
don't want to go anyway.
Yeah, exactly. You're not fired. I quit. And I remember, bouncing around, quick little stuff. I had a job. I was delivering parts for Napa Auto Parts there in high school and stuff like that. And I remember delivering to a place this was in the northwest suburbs of Atlanta, and delivering to a little shop for the first time, dropping off like some oil and stuff. And it was basically like a mini Boyd's, right? They had all these fiberglass street rods. They had big 20-inch wheels, and you're looking at stuff like that. Well, that probably was 17, sorry, not 20s. But looking at stuff and you're like, holy shit, this does exist, not just in California, right? And I talked to that guy, made a little relationship. I don't even remember the name of the shop at this point. I was 16 years old. It was just always in the back of my mind. So when I'm in college, my parents moved from Atlanta to Birmingham. I get removed from college. I don't have a job. I've got to live at home. So I hightail it back to Birmingham, get a job the next morning at a little auto repair place downtown, running, getting parts, cleaning up stuff, doing simple stuff like that. And in like 2 weeks, I found a performance shop that was close over by our house, and we'd get off at the mechanic shop at like 3:00 because we'd start at like 5 a.m. Get off at 3:00. And then the performance rim shop, audio shop didn't close till 6. So I'd get there about 3:30 and I would just stay there. And wasn't getting paid, wasn't doing anything. And I just got to see the things. I just got to look at it. I got to touch it, feel it, talk to a couple of guys, made friends with a couple of salesmen. And it was just one of those things that I was just there. I was just a shop rat. They were open on Saturdays too. So Saturday morning, I'd be down there, help them open up. Then, after you're there, you become friends with somebody, even in a week or so, you're like, all right, I'll go ahead and get the back gate, or I'll throw the back door open, or I'll sweep this, or I'll do this with air hoses. And then you hang out with the tender and you learn how to tint windows. And then you hang out with the head unit guy and he's like, hey, this is how you put a head unit in it. So I did that for, I'd probably say 8 or 9 months of just being there all the time. And then it was 2 brothers that owned the place, and they had 2 different locations. Finally, the 2 brothers were there one day, and they're like, you're never going to leave, are you? And I was like, nope, I'm never going to leave. I'm just here. I love it. And they're like, all right, well, why don't you just come here full time, right? You know enough about it. And I didn't have any real skills then, but then I just learned along the way. Then we started moving into other stuff. Anyway, started getting into more like installs, and then we were doing suspension, and then we were doing superchargers and nitrous refills and, stuff along the way. Skip a little bit, become friends with a guy named Jonathan Goolsby. Before there was a Goolsby Customs, I was selling a lot of parts. He was a painter at a dealer. We were building stuff on the side. Starts a collision shop in 2005. Our first customer, right? Collision shop was what paid the bills, but we were a hot rod shop after 4 o'clock.
Did you know that going into it? That was the plan?
Yeah, 100%. You couldn't just start a hot rod shop and be like, we're building hot rods. We had paint jobs. We were painting a lot of guys' stuff, right? But we weren't building full cars. We were building our own shit. Got the shop. It gave us more space to build our own shit, then more space to do other paint jobs. But we were going to build this into, let's finish our cars, the Galaxy and the Starliner. We're going to get those out in front of people, and then bigger builds would come. Along the way, our first kind of big customer, guys like, hey, I've seen what you're doing. I want you to assemble my car after it's all, if I'm going to do the fab work, bring it to you as a roller. You do all the paint and body and put it together. It was a 67 Chevelle. Good local customer, owned a machine shop, had some money. He was very particular. He's like, this is what you're going to do, and this is how much I'm going to spend. And at that point, we're like, okay, whatever, right? He had saw the orange 66 Chevelle that the Roadster Shop had built, that you debuted your first Pro Touring chassis under, the Fast Track chassis.
Yep.
He had to have been one of the very first ones of that chassis. He'd have purchased that chassis on his own and had it there in the shop. So we go over to his house. He's got this Roadster Shop chassis that he just kind of uncrated. He's got 502
with a Barry Grant 6-shooter.
He's got a 502 GM crate motor is still in the crate. He's got his Chevelle that he's disassembled and got the factory chassis out from under it. And then he's got a box with a Barry Grant 6-shooter in it, right? So he's like, all right, I've got the parts. So I mean, this isn't going to be much for you to put together. I'm like, well,
You have 3 parts.
you did all the hard part. You like yeah, okay. So anyway, fast forward, we go through, we build that car. He had one mission, and that was to go to Shades of the Past in Pigeon Forge and win top 25. That was his bar. He's like, well, I want to be in the top 25 at Shades of the Past. He had gotten into the street rod, hot rod kind of world about 4 years earlier than that. He had made a little bit of money. He goes to the NSRA Street Rod Nationals and buys like 3 cars there. He's like, that's cool. It's red with tan interior. That's cool. It's blue with tan interior. That's cool. So he buys those cars and then takes them to Pigeon Forge, and Bobby Alloway just walks right by him. Doesn't care anything about it. He's like, I spent good money on these cars, and I didn't win an award. So in his mind, all he cares about is winning
That's
top
an
25.
Interesting motivation to build a car.
That is, well, he's an interesting guy.
Okay.
Those plastic trophies carry a lot of weight.
Yeah, I guess.
So that was his mind. So we build the car. We learned on donating, right? Because we had in our mind what the quality of work that we wanted to put out. And we also know when that check stopped. So we kept on for quite a long time to build that car to the quality it needed to be. Funny stories about the Barry Grant that we'll talk about one day in the podcast. Anyway, we get that car to Shades of the Past. Bobby comes up and he picks it for top 25, right? So that made our day. Mission accomplished. Buddy was happy. That car gets selected to go in HRIA's banquet thing for SEMA 2 months after that. So we take it to SEMA. Now we're like, holy shit, we've made it, right? So the car's at SEMA, and that's how I met these 3. They walk by. It was Phil, Jeremy, and Neil. They walked by, stopped, and said, wow, that's really fucking cool. Chassis looks great, this stuff. And we talked for probably 30, 45 minutes, and then hung out most of the rest of the week. And that weekend we had the Optima Streetcar Invitational shootout thing.
Those are early days of OUSCI. Yeah.
Oh yeah,
That was
very
the first one, I think.
That was the actual where they did the golden ticket invitational.
That's when they were like actual street cars, and none of them were up to par to be on a racetrack.
Right.
No, ask me how I know.
I was at that event.
Yeah.
I was at the first 3 or 4 in a row that were early ones. Yeah. And they were. That was like Stilo walking away with stuff back then. So
Yes, Kilo just dominated. He was the only guy that came prepared.
when you're a GM engineer, that helps. But
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, unlimited. There was a friendship that was made there, and then we were doing the same show circuit and stuff, and it just became closer and closer and tighter and tighter. And I mean, we'd get to a show and set up the booth and stuff like that, and it was, text back and forth, what were we doing for dinner tonight? And then Friday was the same thing, and what were we doing this? And then kind of went from there. It kind of got to a point I was looking for the next step, what that was going to be at, and they'd kind of been on me about, we're not like real big talkers and you can't shut the fuck up. So like, it would be great if you could like just say the things that we need to be said. Yeah. And so the rest is kind of history as far as that.
Right on. I knew some of that, but did not know all of that. So that's pretty cool. I like that. And it's kind of interesting that you guys sort of bonded at SEMA too. I wasn't aware of that.
It is bonded, especially when it was them the ones that came up and introduced themselves too. Because
that's rare, dude.
I know, it's super rare.
Yeah.
I think about it all the
remember.
time.
He thinks it was like his car was that cool. It
Yeah.
was just the first time we saw somebody like build something with our chassis.
Yeah.
So-
You're like, oh wow, there's one of ours.
I mean, I'll give you credit. The car definitely was catchy. That was a banger. That thing was cool as hell. I remember exactly where it was sitting. Was my old man smoking a cigarette when we walked up to
Oh
him?
yeah,
Probably. It was always.
yeah. And then I instantly was like, this dude's cool.
Yeah.
As you guys started to really get into it and grow Roadster Shop, was the goal always we want to essentially be a production chassis manufacturer and scale, and the builds were like a marketing tool, or was it like we like building cars and the chassis thing is sort of this other bit? How did you kind of correlate that in your heads as to like, at this point you have kind of many businesses under one roof, but at the time you're a car builder, you're building chassis. How did that all work? What was the goal?
Where it started to where it ended was probably a complete 180-degree flip. We started off, we just wanted to build the coolest cars out there. Probably just a ego thing, being young and dumb and seeing all these awards and trophies and the big names and wanting to be that. I think all of us, even before we met Josh, had that kind of same mentality in mind that you want to be the top tier and just do what it takes to get there. We were kind of using that mentality on the chassis side too, trying to make them better. And then at some point, it just kind of hit us that we'd build these amazing cars. You can't sell another one. It's just impossible to duplicate that car. If you duplicated it, it wouldn't be the same. People would always want some crazy one-off taillight that we made or a door handle or something like that again, you couldn't really sell. But the thing that we could sell is really what kind of set the stage for that whole build was the chassis that gave you the stance, that gave you the performance, that gave you your motor placement, and kind of set the tone as like the foundation for the rest of the entire car. We were already building that. We didn't, I don't think, put as much stock into it at the time.
Even like the way it was situated in the shop, it was kind of just like everything was just right there. I mean, it was all in one building. If you were building a chassis, it was like a project. It wasn't like a product, so chassis orders would come through and it was no different. Like a lot of the chassis builders were also building hot rods in the shop and vice versa. So like a 40 Ford chassis order would come in and there wasn't really anything super standard. Everything was always like tweaked and you kind of looked at it like a project. But I guess to go back, like we were really just 100% focused on the cars at that time. It was just trying to build really cool stuff. And the chassis were like, it was bringing in some revenue. And we treated the chassis just like we treated the cars. You're trying to make nice products, build it cool. But the light bulb didn't go off yet that we're like, man, we need to like pull back on the cars and scale this chassis shop. This is the future. It just didn't hit. I don't know if the light bulb ever really truly went off. It just kind of
It got a little brighter.
Yeah,
One
just
dim.
yeah.
Yeah, they just kind of started steadily outweighing each other. And at the beginning, the car build was probably 75% of the revenue and chassis were 25%. We probably dedicated 95% of our time to the car build and just a little on the chassis side, but saw the potential or accidentally created the demand that forced us to see the potential and had to start building the chassis better, and then started seeing what kind of time we have in them and how we can produce more and what the revenue was off of that, how to make a better product and how to make more, and just kind of just the snowball that kept evolving.
Yeah, I think traditionally, at least for the last probably 8 or 9 years, it's always been very proactive on marketing and business forward and creating that look. The production side has always been, and not a negative, but the production side has always been reactive to the customer base and what the customers are wanting, right? And then we figure out a way to build what the customer's wanting at the demand that they're wanting. Just up until recently, have we've really gotten proactive on the production side, instead of having to be firemen, every 3 or 4 months, start looking at it as like, all right, well, we've got a body of work now that we can look back and we can see incremental increases here. We can know what the bump is after a new product launch or a new chassis launch, and start laying the infrastructure in place where we can keep up with what our forecasted demand. Before, there was really no forecasted demand. It was just build the best shit. Let's be proactive on getting it out there, making it the coolest thing, and then we'll figure out how to build it at the volume that everybody wants it.
It's interesting you say that. Haggerty has done this thing for years and years and years, like at least a decade, probably twice that long, where they come out with their like price index, and they say, hey, based on all, because we have all this data and we can see people buying and selling cars, and we think that the cars you need to invest in this year that are going to pop are going to be X, Y, and Z. And something I've always wondered is when they come out with that list, how much of that is real and how much of them is that them creating a market. When they come out and say, second gen MR2 turbo is going to be the hot new thing, and nobody gives a shit about them. And then they come out with that list and all of a sudden they're selling for double on BAT. Is that because they were so good at predicting it? Or is that because they said this is going to happen and it drove the market? And I kind of wonder that, like when you guys came out with the Legend series, the square body was already, I think, pretty popular because it was available. It was fairly affordable. You could kind of, work on it yourself, even if you're not like a pro car builder, and they're fairly simple and all that. But all of a sudden you guys come out with that whole series, you come out with different chassis for that square body setup. And all of a sudden I saw, I think it was at the Grand National Roadster Show last year when you guys had one of your builds, the orange one sitting there. And that thing had a 4-person deep crowd around it the entire goddamn show at the Grand National Roadster Show, which is not like this isn't Dino's. This isn't the right demo for that truck. And I kind of wondered, like, how much of it is the tail wagging the dog? Like, are you guys meeting a market demand or are you creating a market demand? I don't know.
I think now we've got to the point where we're creating the market demand. Historically, we would see where it went and what our customers wanted. We've always said it takes someone to build like that first oh shit car that everyone then gets inspired by, and then the kind of market starts going after that. We've taken a good amount of that into our business plan, and we always try to come out with something that's over the top and really in your face to kick off a new product, because if you just build something that's okay, you're not going to get the excitement, you're not going to get the crowd behind it. I think we're in a pretty phenomenal spot right now from the marketing and social media side, where we are in front of so many people and have developed a pretty good reputation where we come out with something unique and it can inspire a lot of the market to follow.
Well, you guys are killing. I mean, I will say this. There's not a lot of companies in the aftermarket that I don't handle that I'm envious of in terms of marketing, and you guys are one of them. You guys are just killing it and have been for years. Your branding.
Appreciate it, man.
Yeah, it is on point. I mean, I love the podcast. I want to talk about that in a minute, but like the branding is good. The line differentiation is great. I mean, you guys are killing it. Your social is killer. Like you've done a really good job in a pretty challenging space. I mean, it's pretty hard to differentiate on the chassis side of the business, and you've done it. So one of the things I wanted to kind of ask you guys about, you've got kind of an interesting thing going where when I think of, the last, 15, 20 years, because Josh, you made that comment earlier on about how like you were surprised that there was car builders that were doing innovative stuff outside of California when you were a teenager. When I think of like the 3 builders that have really changed everything over the last 20 years in terms of what's cool, what's kind of the current state of the pro car build market, it's really you guys, Troy and the Rings. And it's interesting that all 3 of you guys are coming out of the Midwest, not terribly far from each other. Is California even still like as relevant as it used to be?
I don't. I mean,
there's some badasses out there in
Everything else
California.
in California is going to shit, but no, there's some phenomenal. It's a different style, like
South City can only be in California. They've got that look.
I think as it shifted towards muscle cars, like that was the Midwest. And from my knowledge, there's not a lot of muscle car following in California from the 60s, 70s.
In comparison to street rods, no.
They were
hot rods. Right.
Hot rods.
You're right about Bill, though. Bill is doing some badass stuff. And I keep seeing Kobe's car everywhere I go, and that thing is crazy, and I love it. But you're right. On the muscle car side, it really does seem like it's coming out of the Midwest.
But what's even crazier, so when I was in Birmingham, we had Jesse Greening, you had Alan Johnson, and you had Bobby Alloway, and that was the 3. It was like down there at that time, it was like these guys are the gods. They're running shit, And then, obviously Troy's been around forever, but Troy was kind of an anomaly. Troy could be from wherever. You don't even know where fucking Troy's from, right? It's just rad rides,
Right.
But then, the Ring Brothers and the Roadster Shop coming up, and then you see this kind of demographic, and I think it's because the winters suck so bad and everybody just got to work for so long.
That's how we got so much done. Yeah, 100%.
Definitely plays a role. When you look at it though, there's so many talented builders in California that it's probably harder to like stand out because they're all really good.
Yeah.
Here there's not a lot. Like there's a lot of dudes doing like cruise night cars and like run of the mill restorations, but not a lot of people building really high end stuff.
The traditional hot rod thing is still really strong out here. I see probably more of that happening at a very high level than anything else.
If you're not in California, you've got a bigger chip on your shoulder. When you're in California, you're born and raised California, you've been in the hot rod forever, like that is, you don't have nothing to prove. You're just there.
Got it. So it's coming to me now. You're into UFC stuff. Like those fighters that come from like the slums of Brazil.
Why do you think Conor McGregor's so badass? He was poor as shit.
That had to fight their way to the top. they're the killers. I mean, those are the guys winning everything. The guys who like just came into the beautiful gym and just trained with all the other really good guys. I mean, they could still become good fighters, but I don't think they're the.
If you were rolling, if at 16 years old, you were rolling down to go surf in your Model A, right? And the thing, you don't have to prove to anybody you're a hot rod guy. You don't have to prove anybody that you're a hot rod builder. It's sunny outside. The weather's awesome. You've been building hot rods. You've lived it. Bobby Alloway from Tennessee, nowhere, is going to try to put his name on the map to try to build something. You better bring it. And it's the same thing from the Midwest, and it's the same thing from anybody non-California. I think it's a chip on the shoulder.
That makes sense. And speaking of Alloway in Tennessee, you guys were at Triple Crown?
Yeah,
we were.
Boy, it sure seems like the level, just the quality level in general, it just keeps going up. Like, is that real, or is that just what it seems like to me? Because man,
it's the real deal. That it really has. When you walk that show, you've got two lines. The way they set that up at the racetrack, you've got like just two lanes of cars, and there's got to be 200 like really high end cars. It just goes like forever.
The quality's great. You had guys like holding cars and waiting to debut there. We were joking about it this last weekend. It's funny how it's a very unique show. It's super awesome the way he runs it. We've talked about that a lot. Bobby's the only one and Gary that can put on a show that make it acceptable to bring out a 5-year-old car. And you're like, oh shit, that's awesome. Because if at another show you saw a car that won a bunch of awards 4 years ago and they're coming in trying to present it to win something, you're kind of like,
damn,
dude,
trophy chaser.
Dude, that thing's old.
That thing away.
I mean, it's a cool car, but we've seen it. Like, what are you bringing that thing back for? But then with like Triple Crown, it's almost like a reunion, right? It's like oh shit, I remember that car. Oh shit, I remember that car. That's awesome that you brought it out. Or you're driving it. It's weird. It's different.
So when you go to a show like that, or to SEMA, or Columbus or whatever, you're there. I mean, you're still building cars, and you're building nice cars, and at the same time, you're also a vendor to a lot of the other builders. Is that a weird line to walk, or no? Is that something that feels natural?
If you rewind maybe like 10 years ago, we were still super focused on cars and winning awards and being at every show and entering a car in everything. Like I don't think there was a year we didn't have something in the running for Street Machine of the Year for probably like a 10-year span. I mean, we were just always pushing that. And yeah, I think it definitely, I don't know if it created some animosity or some people didn't necessarily want to do business with like their competition. I can understand. It got to the point where, I mean, we backed down a little bit on some of the award-winning stuff and focused more on like the quality of the chassis and the performance of the chassis. And I think it just got to the point where if it works really good, I like to think it's the best thing on the market. So I think people lowered their guard, would you say, at that point, and just realized like this is the right piece to build the car?
Yeah, I think so. It's not one thing. It wasn't a magic bullet. It was a little bit of all. We weren't trying to push customers into building a car for an award. Right. It was if they wanted to, right. And we're putting out better and better chassis where people really didn't have a choice, is what we like to think. And then we also did a way better job of not being us versus them. We did a better job of saying it's us together, right? Let us promote, these shops, and let us do, hell, it's where the damn party came from. It's where the damn podcast came from. It's all that stuff. It was to show this is a community. And if you're a part of the community, we're going to help you, but you got to buy in. You got to buy a jam chassis to be a part of the community.
Building the cars and using the cars, I think, was another huge stepping stone, that you could showcase your product. You could show that it works. You could show that you're actually using it. And we were always just refining it, making it better. We were fighting the exact same problems that all the builders were, and having to stay up on the trends with what motors to use and what serpentine drives to run with them. So we just kind of developed a pretty massive collection of knowledge that then went into our chassis, and all of the other builders, I think, appreciated that. And we kind of did a lot of the heavy lifting for them, and they could relate to us and bounce a lot of questions off of us. So I think that really helped kind of take the chassis to the next level. So good benefit from building cars. I think we shifted gears at the right time and got into the road tour cars and the survivor cars, and again, kind of change the direction of just getting out there, driving them, using them, having fun with them.
Well, and I will say, as someone who is not a particularly talented builder, but I've built cars and covered this stuff my whole life, the majority of aftermarket brands going back the last 50 or 60 years, I mean, everybody knows the old adage, you buy an aftermarket part and then the real work begins getting it to work right. It's cool that it seems like, I mean, it seems like there's been sort of a fork in the road, and we'll maybe get into the other stuff, I don't know, but there is a group of companies that has actually dedicated themselves to building products that actually work right. And I think being a car builder has helped you guys, because to be honest, I think that's why the crate motor thing has kind of exploded the way it has. And I know you've had Norris on for Blueprint and other stuff, is if you can build a turnkey package that actually works. People will pay for that. They want it. They don't want to have to screw with it.
They want something that's proven.
Speaking of the party that you mentioned, so you've got quite the rep on that party. It's the same night as the SEMA banquet. It is definitely a different vibe than the SEMA banquet.
We do it later though, so everybody can do
Yeah.
both if you're man enough.
I'm curious, as the years have gone by, have you guys gotten any heat over that, or is it only positive feedback on that? Especially now that, the company's getting more mature and you've got some outside investors and all that. Is that still everything? Does corporate ever say, hey, this is too much, or is it okay? Like, can you guys kind of still do whatever you want to do?
Nobody's telling us anything to do there. That hasn't been a problem. We've really never had any heat. We had heat from Ed Capon. That was just because Tim Strange
Yeah.
ran his mouth too much.
Yeah, Tim went a little hard.
But that wasn't our fault. That's Tim Strange's fault. And that's just because
That's you run that risk when,
that's what you
when
get.
you give the mic to Tim.
There's been no negative from that. The only negative is like you said, is trying to live up to an increasingly heightened bar or a reputation. I mean, obviously it can't go on forever. At some point it's got to either dial back or end. But for right now, it's.
Yeah, the only pushback we get is not having enough tickets, which
Yeah.
there's a capacity in the room and a dollar capacity for making all that happen. So
Yeah,
if
the
we can
dollar. I
invite
think the dollar
everybody-
capacity hits before the room capacity does. If we're going to be honest, that's
just like 100 people before. But
No, it's cool that you do it though. There's not a lot of companies that are actually investing in something after hours at that level just to let people network and have a good time. So it's cool.
Well, there's two things. Some about we talk about on the podcast too, but we have such a really good time and such great relationships with so many of our customers and vendors, partners, whatever it be. SEMA is such an absolute nightmare. You all know it. There's how many dinner reservations do you plan in one night, and then you double up and you're going to meet with this guy and this runs long, all that stuff. So it's good to have that thing that's kind of set aside. We like to have fun, but it's easy for a company to say we're so appreciative of our customers and hey, say thank you and hey, do this and hey, and it's a different thing to show it. Just like with everything, we want to show it and we want to do it different. We want to do it the Roadster Shop way. Everything that we do, it's let's do it the Roadster Shop way. And sometimes that's a little different than what other people do.
That's cool. So speaking of the podcast, tell me the story about oil and whiskey. It's good. I love it. I love that you're completely unfiltered.
Now, if you want to talk about something that maybe we get some negative feedback,
Yeah,
on,
that'd
that might be.
Do you really?
We've probably never had as much negative feedback as we have on anything except the podcast.
Why?
And it's not a lot, but
Yeah,
it's amazing. I mean, some of these guys aren't like, massive customers or fans, but learning the podcast side of things, a lot of people listen and listen only, and they listen in the same routine, right? So if anything changes audio, if their headphones pick up something different, right, they will let you know. People that listen to the podcast and things change, they're going to let you know it's too quiet, it's too loud. This guy's voice does this. I don't like that. You'll get those in comments, and I'm like, man, you are really
so
into
you're not
it.
talking about like the guest or the content. They're actually complaining about like the production value.
It's just the change in the production. Nobody's saying like, hey, this is bad. It's like, this is my 17th episode in, and on the 18th episode, volume is definitely lower than what it has been. I'm used to this. I've got to turn the volume up.
was Dan Kahn in an RV or something, and we
Yeah,
could barely hear him.
Wow.
No.
That's for
When
the
it-
free show that they don't have to pay for. That's interesting. Okay.
When we first rolled it out, there were a handful of emails. You remember any of those? We got a handful of emails of just
Potty mouth
people-
stuff.
And I'm
Yeah.
like, you're getting me, right? It's just, it is what it is. That's the way I speak, and it's
Can't fake it.
love it or hate it. It's,
Yeah, but I respect that. And honestly, I think we're fortunate that we work in an industry that's mostly made of people who can't do anything else. So it's fine. But you guys get into the 2A stuff and you're dropping F-bombs and you're doing stuff that I think in other industries would be really bad, right? Like you can't get some guy on who builds ARs for a living or whatever. You'd get blown up. And so the fact that I think that you're being authentic, to be honest, if anything for me adds to the value, because it's oh, these are real people. This isn't some sales guy in a suit.
Makers are makers. Like if you're building something, making something, employing people and doing it, here, it doesn't matter your political beliefs or whatever. There's something to be learned out of a podcast there of somebody that's figured it out. He's dealing with the struggles. He's trying to promote his brand. He's dealing with employees. He's doing that, or he's done 15 other things that have failed on his way to doing this. And this one's just maybe on teetering of if it's going to make it or not. I think that's been good. Brendan Schaub got some free feedback, but everybody hates Brendan Schaub.
yeah, but that's
a
one of the
personal
few. When they go out to the masses, he's a pretty big icon,
Yeah.
right? He's got a huge following. So sometimes when they venture outside of our nice kind of welcoming community,
You'll
get a
bring
little-
in some folks.
get a little more heat.
But none of it's bad.
It's overwhelmingly positive, to be honest with you, because I think the thing that we do, which Yeah, we probably do it inadvertently, but I'm just being me. They're being them. So we're just giving out all the damn secrets. Like everything, it's 20 years of secrets. And then all these guys you have on there, it's all the industry stuff. It's like everything that everybody's been through. Nobody's withholding any information. I think it's the first thing that exists for this industry that's you're just shooting people straight. It's no bullshit. Yeah, there's a lot of cars. Motors blow up, things go south. There's issues, and
I remember
we tell like it is.
I remember being consuming so much magazine print media at a young age, from middle school, high school, and then even when I was doing this for a living, because YouTube wasn't a thing there to watch hot rod builders, right? So it was, every bit of media was print media. And I remember, I might be the weirdo, but I remember really digging like a question and answer when they'd have a builder on there of like 5 minutes with so-and-so, 5 minutes with it. Because at that point I could get something. I felt like I knew that person as a human being just a little bit more, right? So I would get something out of that. If you would go to a show and you'd see them, I would listen into conversations. I had no business being in. I wasn't like, he wasn't talking to me, it wasn't anything, but I'd listen to hear things. When the rides came out and some of this stuff, the humanization of seeing these builders and seeing that they are people and that's how they deal with things was fuel to my fire. And I think that we're doing the same thing with the guests that we're having on and giving them that opportunity to listen to what that is. Not from us, but the people that we have on. I know that if this had existed when I was coming up, I would have consumed every waking moment of it from every single builder that was there, because then, I don't know, there's just something different about, maybe it's the way I am. I like behind the scenes footage. I like, even if it's a movie or something like that, I'll watch something of the making of it, because then I feel like I can appreciate the thing more because it's more real. And I don't know, I think that's one of the secrets to what it is. Even if it's a dumb conversation, it has nothing to do with the business that they're in. You at least get to know that person a little bit more, and you can kind of see, or it humanizes them. And when you're dealing with something that's shitty, you're like, oh man, I don't feel so bad now.
So was the goal with Oil and Whiskey to give a platform to your chassis customers and help them promote themselves? I can't imagine that Oil and Whiskey on its own is selling a ton of chassis as a marketing tool, because you guys rarely talk about them. Was it a brand building exercise?
The goal with Oil and Whiskey was to shut people up and quit asking us about stuff, because we had a relationship with a marketing company that had done some a media company that had done some film work for collaboration, and then we used them for a road tour video. They did like 7 episodes. We really clicked with them. Great guys. Then things started getting pitched for predominantly TV show stuff, and it was always a no, we're not interested. No, we're not interested. We started feeling bad, just being honest.
We were getting hit from all angles at that point in time. You're getting the producers from every one of these shows. We're having meetings with them, and just to humor them, because none of us wanted to be on TV. Some people it works great for our shop, we felt it would be detrimental, and it didn't suit our personalities. So we just kind of humored the people, listened to it, but it got to the point there was like so much of it, and got
we felt bad for this company, because we had a personal relationship with them, and we kept saying no to everything. They had been throwing out this podcast deal, and it was always, you don't have to worry about it. We're going to handle it. We'll do this. You just guys. And we always kept saying, this is stupid. Nobody's going to listen to it. No, this is so pretentious of us to do it. The only reason we said yes was because we felt bad saying no for all those other reasons, right? And our thing is
the lesser of all evils.
It's the lesser of all evils. This is going to be so fast, we won't have to say no because nobody will listen to it, right? And they're going to politely have to bow out, right?
There was a brand building element of it.
Well, if we're gonna do it, but that came after. Once we did it, we started doing it. We honestly enjoyed it, and that's the only reason it's kept on, is because we had a great time doing it. And a great time having some of these conversations with some of these builders. And we're like, we've always said, we're going to continue doing it as long as we're having fun. When we stop having fun, it's over.
And we wanted to hear about a lot of these builders' backstories and how they made it, and the struggles that they went through, and get some of their insight on what were great ideas, what were horrible ideas, and kind of how it shaped their business and growth. And every show we go to, car show wise, SEMA, that's what we hear from the vast majority of people. Has come up like, absolutely love your show, man. It was awesome hearing how Alan Johnson did this, and this. And I think you get some of that perception that some of these people are so perfect, and it's just 100% perfect on everything they do. And then you hear the backstory, and you can relate to them a whole lot more, because they went through a lot of the same struggles our listeners are going through. So a little bit of a confidence builder, and you can pick up a ton of just little tricks and tips here and there to help your business, help your cars.
100%. But that's all stuff we've learned after.
Yeah.
We're not acting like we knew it going in.
Yeah.
When I did my first podcast a long time ago, at the time, the barrier was pretty high. Like, it was hard to even download it. right? That was before like there was an iPhone app and all that stuff. But when I started this podcast up, a friend of mine who has a non-automotive podcast said, hey, I forget the exact number. It's a crazy number. Like 95% of podcasters never make it past 8 episodes. So if you can get to like 10, you're already in rare air.
Really?
Yeah. And if you can get to like 50, you're in like the top 2% in each category in terms of just like most people never get that far.
I can let you know a little secret there. You sign a contract to do 52 of them, and then you're pretty well committed. You have to do them.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
Yeah, but what tells you that like you can't get past 5 or 10? Like you could be the person out on the dance floor all by yourself, just cutting it up all night long, right? If like nobody's listening to it, you still
Yeah, but I think the point is like most people, after you do 3 or 4,
you give up.
You give up.
Okay,
Yeah, you give up. I think most podcasts, I mean, you guys have a pretty high production value. I think most people and most podcasts, it's like a guy in his living room or something and just gets bored and moves on and just doesn't do it. And so just that kind of that Rocky Balboa speech about if you just keep getting up off the mat and keep moving forward, eventually that you're going to win. Like, I think that's kind of the deal. And with you guys, what I don't know if you realize this or not. My entire career, I've been working alongside or with car builders. If you put aside the 20 sort of big name builders who have done it for a really long time and somehow made a living and been successful at it, the majority of car builders I've interacted with in my life, almost all of whom have been wonderful people, almost all of whom have been talented. I consider them like modern day artists. They're really talented and they're terrible business people. And almost none of them can figure out how to make a living. And they're always robbing Peter to pay Paul and taking a deposit from this guy to buy parts for this build. I mean, and it's just, I'm not talking shit. It just is what it is. And I'm not talking about the big name builders. I'm talking about a lot of these sort of meat and potato, just a guy with a shop or a family with a shop. And what you have built that's sort of interesting is you have built this archive of interviews, like long form, nuanced conversations with the most successful people in the history of our industry, explaining what they did right and what they did wrong. I don't think that has ever existed before because it definitely didn't exist in the magazines. There wasn't enough paper printed on. So if somebody was willing to sit there and just shotgun every episode you've ever done, that's kind of like you made like a masterclass of how to be a car builder.
Oh shit, we're putting it behind the paywall now. Damn, I didn't think about that.
It's true though, right? I mean, it's a hard way to earn a living. You've interviewed most of the people who have figured it out.
No, I mean, that's one of the things that we do put a lot of merit in that. And I know there's a lot of younger aspiring builders that listen to it, and it's humbling and it's awesome when those guys, when you cross paths with them at a show and they tell you how like you've motivated them. And that's just it. You're putting all that information out for them that never existed. We never had access to that. That if a young guy's coming up and he's got the stamina to tolerate listening to the three of us for a length of time, there's so much good information that's priceless.
We learn from it. I mean, there's shit we pick up. I ran into a couple of guys at Triple Crown. I was walking over looking at some of the swap meet stuff. 3 guys stopped me and like, hey man, love the podcast, stuff like that. He's like, I gotta tell you, I gotta be honest with you. He's like, I've been listening to pretty much all of them. And whenever I tell my friends, like, that dude right there, that dude's an asshole. But like, that's an asshole I'd probably like to hang out with. So we talked for about 5 minutes and I go to walk away. I was like, so what do you think? He's like, yep, same thing. Exactly. You're an asshole I'd like to hang out with. I appreciate it. My point to that was listening to it breaks down the barriers. Same thing we were talking about, like the stigma of the animosity from builders of not wanting to buy from their competitor and stuff like that. I've met so many, and you guys have too. We all have at the shows of builders that have come up that it has broken down those barriers. They've listened to one of their friends be on the podcast. Now they listen to the podcast. Now they've got an icebreaker. They can come up and talk about like, hey, I listened to so-and-so's episode. That was really awesome. We'll talk 15 minutes about the podcast. They're like, man, I got a customer coming up. Probably need to get a chassis going. I've never bought one of yours, but who's got to talk to? Can you take care of me? And stuff like that. It is an icebreaker because you feel like you get to know them. How many builders you talk about, the egos that are out there, right? And it's difficult. Some people are just not built, or the type of people that are want to walk at a show and just walk up into a booth and be like, I need to talk to somebody about buying something, right? You're more apt to do it if you've got a guy, you've got an in, or hey, hell, we do it all the time. You have a contact so-and-so. Hey, can you send me a contact to this? We do it all the time because you don't want to just cold call and be the guy. You want to have a guy like, hey, so-and-so told me to call you, or, hey, I've got your email. So I think it's almost like the icebreaker.
That's an interesting point. Well, speaking of that young guy, if you could talk to that 25-year-old who says, hey, I want to be a car builder. I want to start my own shop. I want to do what you guys did. What do you tell them? What advice would you give them?
Don't chase the stupid shit that doesn't mean anything. Always make your customer happy. There's always the extra mile that you can do with your labor, even when the customer's pocketbook runs out. That's my advice, especially getting started trying to make your business card.
Yeah, for mine, it's changed over the years. I mean, I actually just had this conversation with a kid who came up to us at the Triple Crown, and it's like a perfect example of this. Young guy, very little experience. He's built like a C10 at home, and he was looking for like advice on what direction to go. Maybe he wants to get into this. Maybe he wants to come work here. I feel like there's two ways that you go, and I explained this to him. Like, number one, if you want to be like the most versatile, best, most talented fabricator out there, in this day and age, you really need an engineering background as well, because things have gotten so complex. There's you're so much more efficient when you have those skills. I just think it's so beneficial that if you're getting into it right now, I think that's the future of it. The tools, the technology, the way things are going. So I say that, right? To prepare yourself, arm yourself with those skills. But just the general stuff, you just got to keep pushing. Man, at the end of the day, it's like just push, because it's just that Rocky Balboa quote. It's going to kick your ass every single day. You don't want to give up. You just got to keep going. Take care of the customer and keep pushing. That's it.
Yeah, I think that's key, just to come in again tomorrow and keep fighting that same fight, because as you keep going, there's another day that would kick your ass and make you want to quit. But if you beat that day and you come in the next day and you beat that day and keep moving forward, eventually something good's going to come of it.
Yeah, if you're looking for peace and fame and tranquility and unicorn farts and stuff like that,
You've come
this
to the
ain't
wrong place.
this ain't it.
This is not the way of living. No.
And I think my piece of advice, I'd go a little bit different angle than these guys, because I'm working on the front side of it. And like you said earlier, there's not a lot of businessmen in this industry. It's not a very complicated business to run. You're selling parts and you're selling labor. Track both of those. Understand what you're capable of billing, what you should be, and what you're capable of donating to take your cars to the next level. Spend a little bit of time on the business side, because that's what you're doing this for at the end of the day. And if you don't have money in the bank account to pay your bills, then you're not in business anymore, and you're going to go back to doing it as a hobby.
You've always been telling us it's so more complicated than that. Me and Jared always say it's 2 buckets. You got the bucket coming in, your bucket going out. And you're like, oh, there's so much more to it. Sounds pretty easy to me.
There's a computer system. There's not a bucket.
All three of you guys have talked about kind of doing whatever it takes to get the customer happy. And 2 of the 3 of you use the word donating. And that's interesting, because even in my business, like, we do that a lot, where we're like, we have a client, we want to make them happy. And at the end of the day, there's only so many hours in that retainer, and we're just going to do it anyway.
But the thing about donating is still, to Phil's point, you still can be a smart businessman about how to donate it. That doesn't mean you just go and pay all the employees to do it all for free because you don't feel like working the weekend, right? When it comes time to donate and stuff like that, especially starting out, when you're starting out and you've got 1 or none employees, right?
Do it
And
yourself.
it's a contract. It's you. You've got to do it. There's sacrifices, and there is significant others, and there's families, and there's people doing it. They're just not cut out for it.
I was going to piggyback on what you said, Phil, because that's the thing, as your labor is completely free when you're in those early years, and you've got the time to do it, and you should be young enough that you have the energy to do it. If you don't do it, then nothing else matters, because it's just not going to work. There's no way of doing this without probably donating 50% of your labor in the early years. But still, to your point, you got to bill. So that's the stuff, that's the 9 to 5.
Yeah.
You should be billing, right? You should be billing a 40-hour work week, but you damn well better be working a 100-hour work week.
But when you're doing that, you're not just investing in that build or in that customer, you're investing in yourself. You're investing in your own brand.
And still, I mean, we're 20 years into it, and I don't think there's a night that goes by that I don't leave here that I'm not there physically burning the midnight oil and like welding stuff up and fabricating, but researching and brainstorming and getting ideas, and
Or on the phone with customers.
or talking to customers, because I genuinely like want it to be awesome, right? So I don't turn it off at the end of the day. I'm just not going to think about this C10 build, and I'm going to come back tomorrow and think about it. You dream about it. You think about it all night long. And I think there's a lot of industries like remodel your house or do something there. Like, do you really think that person's going home and thinking like all night long about what he wants your bathroom to look like, or special finishes, or what carpet to put in here or something like that? They turn it off.
Right.
Definitely not pulling an all-nighter to get your bathroom done for SEMA.
Yeah. Right.
Well, I know we've gone on way longer, and you've probably got to go. We talked about the Chevelle earlier, right? And this was way back in the day. But I knew that building that Chevelle to get our name out there, right? And I talked about his checkbook ran out way before any of those kind of stuff. I I remember vividly deburring that entire block and that intake and all that kind of stuff. That was all at night for free. That whole
Did you do
entire
it on
thing.
the second block?
Yeah.
Well, and then there's things that's just
Did.
stupid because nobody's even going to see that. That's just a giant waste of
I
time.
remember, and there was some things we did on the firewall, and I remember vividly even some things that you had mentioned on that car and seeing, and that was stuff that we knew we wanted to do. We talked to the customer and talked to him like, this is what we want to do. And he's like, that's fine. If you guys want to do it, he's going to be the recipient of a better car. If we wouldn't have done that, the customer would have been happy with what he got, right? What he paid for. Would they have stopped and looked at the car, or would, it won top 25, or would have done these kind of things? I don't know. Maybe I harp on it so much because I know the difference that it did make, or at least I attribute it to that difference.
There's a book that I'm obsessed with and I talk about too much called Unreasonable Hospitality, and it's written by a guy named Will Jadara. He took over a restaurant. He had worked in the restaurant industry, was not a chef. He was a front of house guy, and he took over 11 Madison Park when it was just like a kind of steakhouse in New York. Within, I think, like 6 years, it was named the #1 restaurant in the world. The way he did it was entirely through that. It was through service that they didn't ask anyone to pay for it. Nobody asked for it. But like they would do all this crazy research on customers, and they'd find out, oh, you've got a birthday, or like your favorite food is something they don't even make, and they'd put it on the menu. And like the famous story about them was he was working front of house at this restaurant, and he heard a bunch of tourists that had come over from like France, and they were talking about how they had eaten at every major restaurant in New York. The only thing they hadn't tried was a New York City street dog. So he went out to the hot dog cart vendor. This is at like a $500 plate restaurant, and got a bunch of dirty water dogs and brought them out and plated them and brought them to the customers. And his theory behind it was, if you do that, they will take care of you, and word gets out, and that is your whole brand will be based on how you take care of people. And the side benefit, and the thing he got into in the book a lot that I've given copies of it to my entire staff, is it also gives your people a sense of purpose, because they see the joy that you're bringing that customer for deburring his block, and he didn't pay for it, and he didn't even ask for it, and he didn't even think of it, but he's stoked. And then the employees feel really good because they're like, oh man, I'm part of this thing that's really cool, and I'm part of a mission, and I'm making people really happy. And there's something to that, I think.
100%. I mean, look at Chick-fil-A. I mean,
Totally.
Their food's great, but their rabid fan base is strictly because of their hospitality.
The people. Yeah.
How they get through stuff. They do it to take care of you. Waffle House is much the same way.
Yeah.
With a little bit of food poisoning thrown in. But yeah, as we wind this thing down, I'm going to ask you guys a question, and it's a tough one. So if you don't want to get into it, that's okay. We can edit this part out. But there has been a lot of crazy shit going down in our industry over the last couple of years, but especially over the last couple of months. And a lot of the M&A stuff has been getting a little ugly. And some of the big supergroup brands that we all know have been very public about having some challenges. What does SEMA look like? And what's the future of this whole thing look like over the next couple of years? And I mean, I know you guys are kind of in the thick of it. So where is this all going? What do you think?
There's a lot of examples of how to do it the wrong way. That's been quite obvious. So we just,
I think we've seen. Yeah, I know. I mean, I think we've seen like kind of a rise and fall of something that was great, was going great, still makes some great products. We don't need to name names.
No.
It just went south. I think it was too fast, too soon, and all the founders of these individual companies left them. And there's truly something there. The founders drive these things. All these businesses are built by passion and gut instinct, and all these guys live it. So when you lose that, I think you really lose a lot. Yeah. I mean, I look back to some, like, that company did a tremendous amount for this industry. I mean, there isn't a car that goes out the door here that isn't loaded up with a lot of those products, but maybe they'll sort that stuff out. But there's been some good, and then there's been some bad. Like you look at some of the other companies that have been acquired, it's been positive. For us, we thought long and hard about this and made sure to make the right decision so that we didn't end up in one of those situations. And it's been very positive for us. It's funny. A lot of people want it to not be. People from the outside looking in, it's like they always want drama, and they always want to see, part of them wants to see you fail. I'm not saying everybody, but that's like human nature. There's kind of sort of some of that. But we made a very educated, long ass decision to do this, and it's been positive.
Oh, and you're still sitting there, which says something.
Then look at our growth over the last year. I mean, what have we done? And look where we're going. We're heading back to SEMA. This is year 2 at SEMA, after post deal done. it's still rock and rolling. Another kick-ass SEMA party coming, and where it goes for the whole industry, I don't know. I mean, I think there's been maybe now a bad example that's quite visible that maybe straightens things out.
Yeah, hoping it kind of maybe lowers the barrier of entry for some new guys that were potentially drowned out and didn't have the opportunity to get in there, that with all the other drama and attention going that way, that there might be a new playing field for them to get in on and a little bit easier and have some new, fresh, younger ideas.
I'm going to say two things, and it'll be pretty plain and simple. We talked about it earlier. Everything we look at, we want to do it the Roadster Shop way. So we're still looking at doing the same exact thing with every decision that's being made. It's the Roadster Shop way. The other part of it, you talked about the restaurateur in New York City that overheard those people, and he goes out. That was his business. Do you think out of any meetings, out of any of this stuff, he could have convinced any of his employees to do the same thing? But he made that decision because that was his business, and he went out there and did it.
In fact, in the book, he talks about the fact that everyone in the kitchen hated his guts for doing it.
And he probably knew all along that's the right thing to do. This is a great move. And everybody's probably sitting there looking at him like, what a fucking moron. This is $500 a plate. You're going to put a greasy ass hot dog in here?
Yep, trust me.
Obviously made the right move.
I don't mean to imply that M&A is bad. Like, we work with quite a few companies that have gone through that process that are good. And in most cases, the principals are still involved. And I think that's great. It's been interesting. But you're right. I do think, for what it's worth, it is opening up some opportunity for new people with new ideas too. So that's good. Last question. I live my life by a philosophy of make every mistake once. Kind of like you, Jeremy. I was not an academic kid. And so I had to kind of go to school, hard knocks, and learn everything the hard way. And I continue to do that daily. So a question I ask all of our guests on the show, and I'd love all three of you guys to answer if you got time, is you think back over your career and at your time at Roadster Shop, what's the biggest mistake you made and what did you learn from it?
That's tough because I've made a lot of them. You know, you make a hell of a lot of mistakes in business. But if I had to look to one thing that I think is, had I changed this or had we changed this, things would probably be significantly better than they are now. And we you know, I think we're doing great, but I think it's just like making fast decisions, almost instantaneous, and sticking with it and just making it happen. That's probably been the only opportunities I think that we've ever missed have been just from dragging ass and not committing, not making that decision. There's lots of things from a fabrication standpoint and car building, but everybody makes those mistakes and figure them out. They usually hurt bad enough that you better not make them again. So I don't think I need to get into all those. But
yeah, I was going to spin it a little bit. And I think the biggest mistake is not learning from your mistakes. We screw stuff up on a regular, and I've always learned from everything. And you get bit once, you get bit hard, and you're never going to do that again. But if you don't pay attention, or if you're stupid enough to do it again, it's going to hurt way worse the second or third time. So learn from what you did, use it as a teaching moment, and you can always grow significantly better and learn much more from your mistakes than from your victories, I think.
Don't be afraid to look like an asshole.
When did you make that mistake?
yeah, you've been killing it in that department.
Yeah. I learned that a long time ago. Don't be afraid. No, I've always prided myself on being a decent communicator and salesman and being able to figure out, you know, how to jive with somebody, right? And how to click and how to find that thing. And a lot of times it was very quickly processing what that guy would be into or like or person that we could kind of communicate with. And maybe it's not all the time. I'm maybe overselling some of the enthusiasm about a certain topic, you know, just because it works, you know, a little chameleon. And you made the comment about, I like the fact that on the podcast, you guys are real and you're saying what you're doing. Quite some time ago, I realized that don't be afraid to look like an asshole. We do the same thing on the podcast because sooner or later, even when we're fake, you're going to find something to be pissed off about, right? Or you're going to find something that you hate us about, right? Or you're going to find something, whatever. So why not just be who we are at the start? And don't be afraid to look like an asshole. Answer the question how you answered the question. And 2 weeks from now, you might have a difference of opinion. You come out and be like, you know what? That sounded stupid. I shouldn't have said that. Just roll with it.
I like it. Be authentic.
You don't have a lot of friends doing that. But you feel better at night.
But you only need a few. You know?
Hey,
Too many friends gets.
Sounds like that guy at the show thought that he's like, you're an asshole and I want to be friends with you. So maybe that works. I don't know. Well, guys, I really appreciated all your time. For the people listening, where can they learn more about you? Where can they follow you? Both Roadster Shop, Oil and Whiskey. What are all the places to look for you?
Roadstershop.com, Roadster Shop on Instagram, Roadster Shop on YouTube, Oil and Whiskey on Instagram, Oil and Whiskey on YouTube. Super easy.
Yeah.
Just Google it. Just Google it.
Google it.
Right on. Well, that's a wrap for today's episode of Only the Strong Survive. Be sure to subscribe and drop a review on the platform you're listening to. Once again, I want to say a huge thank you to Jeremy Gerber, Phil Gerber, and Josh Henning from Oil and Whiskey in the Roadster Shop. I hope everyone has a great rest of their day. Thanks, everybody.